Hi, I'm Chris Wilcox, a developer on the Python Tools team, and I'm here to talk to you about using Python tools for Visual Studio and Azure ML Services to make developing easier. We'll talk about the Azure Data Marketplace and how to use its offerings, a Python Django application, to deliver a better end-user experience. In doing so, we'll explore some different features of PTVS and hopefully help you to understand our product better. The Azure Marketplace holds a multitude of offerings that you have access to. A large number of these are free to some extent and provide you with a service to help you make your applications better. Many of these services implement machine learning algorithms that you can use without being a data scientist. The Azure Marketplace offering I am going to use today is called Recommendations. This offering allows us to get recommendations for items in a catalog. In our case, we'll use this with a Python Django application called Azure Fresh. Azure Fresh is a fairly simple site that sells groceries over the internet. Users can log in, provide their addresses, order items, and get their produce without ever leaving the couch. The first thing we need to do anything with Azure Fresh is get the code and open it in Visual Studio. From GitHub, you can see an Open in Visual Studio button. This is added once we install Visual Studio 2015. Once it's been cloned, which I've already done, you can open the solution, and then we're going to look at the update recommendations.py file. What this file is going to allow us to do is train our data set using the recommendation service we spoke of earlier. We'll have to do a few different things in here, but let's take a look quick at what the recommendation service offers us. The recommendation service can be signed up. All we have to do is agree to some simple terms and conditions, and then we'll be presented with an Explore This Dataset option. Once here, we can gain access to our API key under Primary Account Key. This is the secret that will be used to allow us access for our transactions under our account. We can also test drive the service and do things like look at the item recommend call, the build model call, the update model call, and others that we'll be using here today. For most of these services, you have to actually make the REST calls yourself. And this is pretty easy from Python using something like requests. For this particular offering, there's already an API library written that we can use called the recommendation service. So in Visual Studio, we can add to the update recommendations.py file and train our data using the service called recommendations. Quickly before we do that, we're going to make a virtual environment. When we deploy to Azure, it requires a virtual environment so it can tell what its dependencies are for the deployed environment. And so we can add a virtual environment here. It's going to be called env. We'll select Python 3.4, and you can tell that it's detected a requirements.txt file for us. So it already knows all of the requirements that are needed for this project. While it installs that, we can go look as our service is now. We have Azure Fresh, and here's a simple product page. What we're hoping to do is add recommendations, preferably below this apple, that allows us to sell different items to our customers. So let's go back to Visual Studio now that we have our virtual environment ready. If we go under Solution Explorer, we can see that we now have env, and it has all sorts of dependencies into it, mostly things from Django. What we can do is we can instantiate a recommendation service object, providing an email and a key. We can then create a model of a name of our choosing. I'm going to call it Fresh. And let's set a variable to its output. After we've done that, we're going to give it some data. So we're going to start by importing our catalog, all the items that exist in our store. And then we can import that file. So we'll pass it the model ID, the path to our catalog, and then we need to set a URI that says this is for importing catalogs. We're going to do a very similar thing for getting our purchase history. So this part here will be exactly the same, but instead this time we're going to give it a transactions.csv file. And just like before, we're going to import this file. So now that we've imported both our catalog, our entire catalog, as well as the purchase history, we can build a model. We'll wait here for the end. Since building a model can take a bit of time, we'll wait to make sure it's finished doing its thing. So if it wasn't successful, we'll just print bad build, and we'll return. In most cases, the build will be just fine. And then we can update our model. We don't have any description to give, so we'll leave that as none. And then we'll set it as the active build ID, which is the build we just made. When we're done with all this, we can have it print off the model and the build ID. That way, we know what they ended up being set to, because we'll need those in order to get recommendations later. So to run a script, a command like this in Django, it's rather simple. We just need to go to the command prompt. So once we launch a command prompt, we can go ahead and activate our virtual environment. And now we can run commands against the Python version that was made in the virtual environment. Here, we need to run Python, manage.py, update recommendations. This will run the script that we just made. What this is going to do is everything that we asked for. It's going to import the catalog, import our usage, it's going to build the model, and at the end, it's going to return us our string. So now that our build has succeeded and is finished, we can take the build ID and use it so we can make a recommendation service for our users to get their recommendations on. So we can copy this, and we're going to go put that in the config.py file. This is where we just put constants that are used along with the data service. And now let's go write the recommendation code. So if we go into the views.py file and go down to product, we can see a blank area that's waiting for us to enter in some code. So using the recommendation service is pretty easy. We instantiate a recommendation service again, giving it our email and access key as we did before. And then we ask to get a recommendation. In order to get a recommendation, we provide it with our model ID. And then we provide it with the ID that was given as part of this request to the product page. So that's really all we need in order to get recommendations. And with a bit of Django help using their ORM system, we can get some more useful information than just a number. We can ask the product table to get us all of its objects that have the same ID as what we were received as part of our recommendations. And we now have an extremely useful list of products, including their prices as well as images. But does this all work? We can check it locally using the debugger. At the top, you can see a green triangle with Internet Explorer. We can click that, and we'll debug our application locally. So now that it's launched, we can pick an item, such as carrots, and we can see we now have recommendations for items in our store. So we have this running locally, but what do we have to do to get it published up in Azure? We can close this page, and we'll stop debugging. And once we've done that, we can go to Build, Publish Azure Fresh, select Microsoft Azure Web Apps, we can create a new web app, and once we finish creating the web app, we can step through the Publish system. We don't really need to change much of this at all, so we're going to click Publish. And when this completes, we'll have a web application running Python Django up in the Azure cloud. With the help of the Azure Data Marketplace and PTVS, Python developers can accomplish more while working less. It took a minimal amount of code to add recommendations to our Django application and moments to get our site running in Microsoft Azure, where it could be used by our customers. If you want to dive deeper and learn a bit more, visit the links to my side. Happy coding, everyone.